They said this doesn't work. They said burying rotting wood under a garden bed was the kind of thing only people on fringe permaculture forums believed in. That any real agronomist would tell you to throw it out. That it was pseudoscience dressed up as gardening advice. That the people doing it were either delusional or just bad at growing food. So I did it. I filled the bottom of a raised bed with old logs, broken branches, and leaves that had been sitting in a pile in my backyard for 2 years. I didn't buy a single bag of substrate for that layer. No synthetic fertilizer. None of the products that gardening stores insist are non-negotiable. I used what was already there, material that most people would haul to the curb on trash day without a second thought. And that bed outperformed every single conventional bed I've ever built. More productive than the one I filled with premium potting mix. More productive than the one I fertilized on schedule with the right NPK numbers. More productive than the one I watered with the precision of someone who actually read the instructions on every label. More resilient during the dry stretch in midsummer when everything else in the garden was showing stress. More alive when I dug into it at the end of the season. Dense with earthworms, dark with humus, structured in a way that bagged substrate never managed to hold after a single growing season. I ran the comparison for 2 full years. Same bed dimensions, same crops, same sun exposure, same watering schedule for the first month before I let the moisture data guide me. The numbers weren't close, and the gap widened in year 2. So now I have one question. Who decided this was pseudoscience? And why don't they want you to try it? Because when you start pulling that thread, what comes out isn't science. It's money. It's institutional incentive. It's the quiet machinery of an industry that depends on you not knowing what works for free and not asking the one question that changes everything. That's what this video is about. And that's what this channel is built to do. If you're new here, subscribe right now. This channel exists for one reason: to investigate the methods that were buried, dismissed, and labeled myths, and find out who benefits from keeping them that way, who funded the dismissal, and what you were never supposed to discover on your own. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. This method has a name: Hügelkultur. It's a German word that translates roughly to mound culture. And before anyone labeled it pseudoscience, it was simply what farmers did when they didn't have a garden center on every corner telling them what to buy.
High.
It wasn't
the
a
darker
technique.
the soil, the
It
better
wasn't
the
a
yield.
system.
Most times,
It was observation converted into practice. The kind of knowledge that gets passed down not through publications, but through seasons, through soil, through the accumulated
Medieval
experience
European
of people who
raised
couldn't
garden
afford to
beds
be
being
wrong about how
constructed
they
over
grew their
rotting
food.
logs by rough hands.
The practice is old.
A historical
older than
reconstruction.
bagged soil, older than synthetic fertilizer, older than the entire industry that now sells you the idea that growing food requires purchasing specific products in specific packaging with specific instructions on the back. In medieval Europe, farmers built their raised beds directly on top of rotting wood. They didn't have a technical term for it. They had observation. They noticed that the richest soil in the forest always formed around decomposing logs. They noticed that plants growing near rotting stumps were bigger, greener, and more resilient to drought than plants growing in open ground. They replicated that pattern inside their own growing plots, and it worked, reliably, consistently, for generations, without a single bag of anything purchased from anyone. On the other side of the world, indigenous communities in the Amazon were doing something similar on a scale that still staggers researchers today. Archaeologists call it terra preta, dark earth. Soil intentionally engineered from buried organic material, charcoal, food scraps, bone, and decomposing biomass. Not accidental, deliberate. A technology of soil construction that produced land so fertile that researchers measuring it centuries later found nutrient densities that modern agricultural soil can't match. That land didn't wear out. It didn't need to be replaced each season. It kept regenerating because the biological system built into it was still running. In the 20th century, a German researcher named Heidrun Hoverman formalized and documented the Hügelkultur system for modern permaculture. She published the principles, outlined the layering logic, and explained the biology driving it. The method spread through organic farming communities in the 1980s and 1990s across Europe, Australia, and North America. And then something interesting happened. As the method gained traction outside of permaculture circles, as regular home gardeners started sharing results online, the pushback began. Forum posts were dismissed as anecdotal. YouTube comments called it broscience. Extension services didn't include it in official recommendations. Gardening magazines didn't run features on it. The method that had sustained farmers for centuries was being quietly archived, not because the evidence against it was overwhelming, but because there was no product to sell alongside it. You can't bag a rotting log. You can't put a price tag on branches your neighbor's tree service left at the curb. You can't build a subscription model around leaves that fall every autumn for free. And that, right there, is where the story gets interesting. Because when you follow the money, the dismissal stops looking like a scientific judgment and starts looking like a business decision. Here's what the people calling this pseudoscience don't want to engage with: the peer-reviewed literature. Because when you look at what soil scientists actually know about decomposing wood, buried organic matter, and fungal networks, the results don't look like pseudoscience. They look like one of the most sophisticated biological systems on the planet. A system that evolved over hundreds of millions of years before anyone tried to sell you a substitute for it. The first claim is water retention. Decomposing wood contains a porous fiber structure that absorbs and retains water with remarkable efficiency. Measured data shows decomposing wood can store up to 5 times its own dry weight in water. Put a 10-pound log in a bed, that log becomes a 50-pound water reservoir. During dry periods, it releases moisture slowly upward through capillary action, drawn toward plant roots in the soil above. Gardeners who have measured this with soil moisture probes report that beds built with a buried wood layer retain measurable moisture weeks after the last rainfall, while conventional beds with bagged substrate re-dry within days. This is why the forest floor stays damp long after a dry summer. The structure of decaying wood is built for retention. The second claim is heat generation. When wood decomposes, it's driven by microbial activity. Bacteria and fungi breaking down carbon-rich material produce heat as a metabolic byproduct, the same principle that makes a compost pile warm at the center. Buried beneath soil, that heat doesn't dissipate into the air. It radiates upward, warming the root zone from below. Soil temperature measurements in beds with a buried wood core have recorded temperatures 3 to 8 degrees Celsius warmer than surrounding ground during early spring. That difference breaks dormancy weeks ahead of schedule and protects transplants from late frost events. In regions with short growing seasons, that margin is the difference between a full harvest and a crop failure. The third claim is the fungal network. When wood decomposes underground, it gets colonized by mycorrhizal fungi forming mycelium, white thread-like networks that infiltrate every crack and crevice in the decaying material. These networks actively transport phosphorus, nitrogen, and trace minerals from inside the rotting log to the root tips of plants growing above. Peer-reviewed soil science has documented this nutrient transport pathway directly. Mycelium moves phosphorus from a decomposing log to a plant root faster and more efficiently than water-soluble fertilizer moving through plain soil. Now compare that to what's inside a bag of premium potting mix. Sterilized peat moss, perlite, a slow-release synthetic fertilizer bead. No living fungal network, no mycelium, no biological infrastructure at all, just inert particles waiting to be fed from an external source. One that's sold in another bag on the shelf next to it. One system builds itself. The other makes you dependent. The fourth claim is humus production. Humus bonds with minerals, retains nutrients against leaching, maintains soil structure that doesn't compact or wash away. Peat-based bagged mix compacts after one season loses structure and stops retaining nutrients because there's nothing alive inside it to drive regeneration. The buried wood layer keeps producing humus in place underground for years after the bed is built. The biology is not on their side. Now here's the method, layer by layer. This works for any raised bed, wood, concrete, brick, stone. The container doesn't matter. The layering does. Start with the core. Fill the bottom 40% of the bed depth with thick, untreated wood, logs, branches, old firewood, stumps, anything free of paint, varnish, or chemical preservatives. For a 12-inch bed, that's roughly 5 inches of wood. Best options are hardwoods: oak, maple, apple, pear, alder. Partially rotted pieces are better than fresh cut because they've already begun decomposition and will colonize with fungi faster. Avoid black walnut, which releases juglone, a compound toxic to tomatoes, peppers, and many other vegetables. Avoid cedar, which decomposes too slowly and contains natural fungicides that work against the fungal network you're building. Stack rough. Variation in size and texture creates more surface area for colonization. That's a feature, not a flaw. Next comes the filter layer. Pack smaller branches, twigs, dried leaves, straw, and plain cardboard into the gaps between the logs. No glossy coating, no tape, no staples. This layer fills air pockets so the bed doesn't collapse unevenly and creates a transition zone between the slow decomposing wood core and the faster layers above. Wet it thoroughly before continuing. Initial moisture triggers fungal colonization. The third layer is the one most people skip, and the reason most people who try this method fail in year one. Decomposing wood is carbon-rich. The microbes breaking it down need nitrogen to function. If that nitrogen isn't provided externally, those microbes pull it from the planting soil above, robbing your plants of what they need to grow. The result is yellowing leaves, stunted growth, and a first season that looks like the method failed when you simply missed a step. The fix: spread 2 to 4 inches of nitrogen-rich material directly over the filter layer before adding any topsoil. Fresh grass clippings, aged manure, worm castings, or high-green compost all work. Do not skip this layer. The final layer is the planting zone. Most vegetables never root deeper than 10 to 12 inches. You only need quality growing medium for the top 6 to 10 inches of the bed. Everything below is biological infrastructure: water reservoir, heat source, fungal network, humus factory. A conventional bed requires you to purchase 100% of the volume. This method requires 30 to 40%, only the top planting layer. The rest was already in your yard, headed for the trash. Expect the bed to drop several inches in the first few weeks as materials compress, and the decomposition process begins pulling everything tighter. This is completely normal and expected. Add a top-up layer of compost to compensate and level the surface. The settlement slows significantly after the first season and stabilizes as the wood begins converting to humus beneath the surface. Now, the question nobody is asking loudly enough: if this method is backed by real biology, has centuries of documented use across multiple civilizations, reduces input costs by more than half, cuts water use by up to 50%, and produces measurable improvements in soil fertility year over year, why isn't it in every gardening publication? Why isn't it in the official recommendations from agricultural extension services? Why does it keep getting dismissed as pseudoscience? Here's the answer nobody in the industry wants to say out loud: you cannot sell this method. Retail profit margins on bagged potting mix at garden centers sit around 50%. Half of every dollar you spend on a bag of substrate goes directly to the retailer's bottom line. The actual ingredients, peat moss, perlite, bark, filler, cost a fraction of the retail price. The markup is not paying for quality. It's paying for the packaging, the placement, and the decades of messaging that convinced you the bag was necessary in the first place. The real product isn't the soil, it's the dependency. The model is engineered to perpetuate that dependency at every stage. Bagged substrate compacts after one season, so you buy more. Nutrients deplete, so you buy fertilizer. Structure breaks down, so you buy soil conditioner. Every problem the product creates has a solution that costs money, flowing back to the same industry that sold you the original problem. It's a closed loop designed to look like a supply chain and function like a subscription. Hundreds of millions of bags of potting mix are sold every single year. Most are used once and discarded. The plastic alone represents a significant and ongoing environmental cost. But more relevant to this conversation, it represents a purchasing cycle the industry has enormous financial incentive to protect indefinitely. And here's where it gets darker. The people positioned to recommend growing methods to home gardeners, extension services, agricultural universities, gardening media are not neutral parties. Agricultural extension programs receive funding from industry partners. Gardening publications run advertisements from the same substrate, and fertilizer brands their editorial content should be evaluating objectively. The information ecosystem around home gardening is not a free marketplace of ideas. It's a curated landscape where methods that threaten purchasing behavior get quietly deprioritized, not banned, not disproven, just consistently left off the list until they fade from view. Hugelkultur wasn't disproven. It wasn't subjected to rigorous testing and found to fail. It was simply inconvenient. Labeled pseudoscience. Left to circulate in fringe permaculture communities where it wouldn't disrupt retail soil sales at scale. The label did the work that evidence never could. And most people, trusting the label, never looked further. Until people started testing it in their own backyards. Measuring the results. Comparing them side by side against conventional beds. Posting photos, data, and harvests where anyone could see them. And now here we are. This isn't just about how to fill a garden bed for less money. That's the surface story. The real story is what this method reveals about who controls the information you use to make decisions about your own land, and how that control gets maintained without anyone having to say a word about it directly. A method with proven historical use across multiple independent civilizations, supported by peer-reviewed soil science across hydrology, mycology, microbiology, and organic chemistry, capable of reducing input costs by 60%, cutting water consumption by 50%, and producing soil that measurably improves every season without external inputs. That method was labeled pseudoscience, not because the evidence against it was overwhelming, but because the evidence for it pointed entirely away from products and toward resources that can't be packaged, priced, or sold. Rotting logs, dead branches, fallen leaves, things that exist in nearly every backyard, available for free every year without anyone's permission. The moment a growing method stops requiring purchases, it becomes a structural threat to an industry built on the premise that you need to buy something to grow food. And so the method gets the label: fringe, unproven, not recommended. And most people, reasonably, rationally, because they trust the sources giving them that label, move on. They buy the bags. They fertilize the beds that compact after one season. They come back in spring and do it again. But here's what happens when someone actually runs the test and documents it honestly. Year 1, the bed is productive. Year 2, more productive than any conventional bed at the same age. Year 5, you dig into that soil and find something no garden center has ever sold: dark, crumbly, living earth. Mycelium threads woven between root structures. Earthworms in concentrations you've never seen in peat-based mix. A biological system that is actively renewing itself, feeding itself, rebuilding itself, because you gave it the infrastructure to do so once, at the beginning, with material that was already sitting in your backyard. The rotting log at the bottom of that bed is still working right now, quietly, every single day, storing water, releasing heat, feeding the fungal network that feeds your plants. No product required, no subscription, no return trip to the garden center. That's what they didn't want you to find out. Subscribe, and I mean right now. What I showed you today is one method, one example of a technique labeled pseudoscience, dismissed by mainstream sources, and quietly kept off the radar of anyone who could have benefited from it. There are dozens more. Methods that were used for generations, supported by real science, and called myths for one reason: they don't generate revenue for the right people. We investigate them here, one by one, with the same question every time. What do they gain from you believing that? If that question bothers you the same way it bothers me, subscribe. Turn on notifications. Share this video with someone who's about to spend $200 on bags of dead substrate when their backyard already has everything they need. Drop a comment below. Have you tried burying wood in a garden bed? What happened when you did? What did your first season look like, and did the results change your thinking? I read every single comment. Every one. The next investigation is already in production, and it goes deeper than this one. You don't want to miss it.